like real bad sick yesterday.
I feel bad. I know that I ended up giving it to her. I tried so hard not to.
I just something in there. Everybody said, I went home and grabbed something to eat. And I mean, I started a sneezing fit. I bet I sneezed for 10 minutes. I couldn't quit sneezing. I even tried blowing my nose, you know. And,
Oh, I hate
yeah.
that. You know what works for me? I take and I roll up toilet paper to stick it up my nose.
Oh,
It makes me stop sneezing. I look really funny because I got toilet paper hanging out my nose, but it helps. Like, and when it starts to itch and like you just want to just scratch up in there, stick toilet paper.
and usually I'll take like a Claritin, but I thought, no, you're already sleepy. Don't
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So, remember that the first few chapters of the book kind of go back and talk about what they've gone through to get to this point. They're just outside of the Jordan, getting ready to cross over. Moses has pointed out that he's not going to get to go over with everybody and all the things that are a part of that. In chapter 5, he begins his process of going back through the law. Okay, so Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, "Hear, O Israel." Okay, so obviously what we're dealing with is an idiom here. Hear, O Israel. Pay attention, listen up. The statutes and rules that I speak in your hearing today. Okay, listen to the statutes and rules that I speak in your hearing today, and you shall learn them and be careful to do them. Okay, now notice once again, as we've seen so many times in this book, this idea, you shall learn them, you will remember them, you will call them to mind. Okay, remembrance is a big deal in Deuteronomy. Okay, so the Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. Not with our fathers did the Lord make this covenant, but with us, who are all of us here alive today. Okay, so here is what Moses is getting at. The Lord made a special covenant with us, and he's talking about Mount Sinai. Now, when it says not with our fathers, yes, the generation right before was a part of this covenant. But what it's saying is with our ancestors, he didn't make this kind of covenant. Okay, now God had made a covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, but it was not like this. It was not, you're my people. Okay, he didn't make it with our ancestors. He made it with us, who are all of us here alive today. The Lord spoke with you face to face at the mountain out of the midst of the fire. So this has been something major that we've talked about a couple times. Specifically in the giving of the 10 commandments, it is not Moses translating for God or telling them what God had to say. God spoke the 10 commandments aloud to the children of Israel.
and I didn't realize that. I had always, I don't know, taught it or somehow perceived it that he went up to the mountain, he got the 10 commandments and came back to the
Right. But no, that God proclaimed it off the top of the mountain.
And that's when it scared them, and they're like,
Yeah, and then
we don't want to hear his voice no more. Just you tell us.
Why don't you be quiet? Why don't you just tell us what God has to say?
Yeah, let Moses do the speaking for you.
And so we talked about this last time, but one of the things that this brings up is that understand that in the Gospel of Matthew is showing Jesus to be the second Moses because he's up on the mountain. But at the same time, notice it's the same person speaking.
Yeah,
it's
Jesus.
God in the old covenant and it's Jesus in the new covenant giving the law. And in fact, if you look at Matthew 5 through 7, those 3 chapters, there's an interesting statement that comes at the very end of chapter 7. He finishes the entirety of the Sermon on the Mount. And then it says, and they were amazed because he didn't teach like the Pharisees did, but taught like he had authority. The Pharisees tended to teach in such a way that they would go, well, Rabbi so-and-so said, when in regards to what Rabbi so-and-so said, that this is what this means. They always held on to some other person's authority. And Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, well, you've heard it said this, but here's what I tell you.
Yeah.
Well, because he is the authority.
Yeah.
Okay. So it is important that we understand that the 10 commandments, specifically these 10 rules, are given face to face by God to them out of the midst of the fire. And then Moses says, while I stood between the Lord and you at that time to declare to you the word of the Lord. For you were afraid because of the fire, and you did not go up into the mountain. Okay. Now remember, the Exodus tells us how this works. God had told them, you guys prepare for me to show up and make sure none of you go on the mountain.
Don't even go near it.
Don't even go near it. Set up a perimeter around it so
Around
that
it,
nobody
yeah.
gets close. Because if they do, they die. Okay. So he said, the Lord said, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Okay, so first thing, with covenant, and we mentioned this a little bit on Sunday morning, with covenant, it usually begins by a recognition of who the parties are. So as he is giving this covenant with Israel, he says, first of all, let me make sure you know who I am. I'm the Lord your God. And what did I do? I brought you out of the land of Egypt. I brought you out of the house of slavery. This is why you should follow my covenant. Okay. You will have no other gods before me. Okay. That's pretty self-explanatory. No other gods. Verse 8 then goes on, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the father on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. Now, so the discussion of a carved image fits in two elements. Okay. One is the obvious one, that you create an idol. Okay. Which then not only breaks the first commandment, but breaks the second commandment. However, earlier in Deuteronomy, we get the other idea that falls into this, making a carved image and saying that it's God. Okay. Now, go ahead.
Okay, so I got a question though, but that's only like, because it makes me think of like these painters that paint pictures of Jesus
Okay.
and stuff, but it's only bad if they're worshiping it, right? So
Yes.
it's not bad to depict Jesus, it's just bad to worship it.
So let's also make sure we're dealing with this. Jesus is the physical revelation of an invisible God.
Yeah, well, I assume God
Okay.
looks a lot like Jesus. He is the son.
Well, no, because there's no physical to God.
So he's like gaseous?
He's spirit.
Like a ghost. Like a ghost.
So
Okay.
understand, he is all powerful. He can appear in any way he wants to
way
at
he
any
wants,
point in
yeah.
time. Jesus is the revelation of the God that we cannot see.
Okay, explain that word revelation to me.
The image. He is
Okay.
he is the one who reveals who God is to us.
Which is why everybody paints pictures of.
Well, that's
A lot of
part
times.
of it. But understand,
We as humans need something to.
Something to grasp. Yeah, like I'm
So,
trying to grasp.
but understand that there is some discussion here on this front. Let's deal with the whole discussion of the crucifix.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next
Okay.
question. What about the one on the cross?
All right. So notice the difference though. Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, they have a cross that has Jesus on it.
Yeah,
We have a cross that Jesus is not on.
I prefer him not on the cross.
Okay. Why? Well, he's not on the cross anymore.
Right, he is risen.
He's risen. He's not on the cross anymore. The cross is empty.
Yeah,
Okay. Yes, there's a level at which it becomes a major issue when you begin to worship the image. Okay, that's certainly part of this discussion. However, painting a picture of the pictures that you see of Jesus are typically a picture of an event within the scripture that, okay, well, I figured out what Jesus looks like, I'm going to paint him. That's not what it is.
Well, I've seen this one chick that did a painting that she like had a dream of
Right.
Jesus, and she painted this really beautiful picture.
And so you are dealing with a little bit of an interesting discussion based upon this, a carved image. Okay, but the idea here, and this is why I would say this, the Jews themselves gave us the perfect picture of what God was telling them not to do.
With the cow.
Okay, they took and made an image of a golden calf and then said, here's your God.
Yeah.
Okay, remember in chapter 3 and chapter 4, what it said was, you haven't seen me.
Yeah.
And so don't
Don't
try to make me into something that I'm not.
Yeah.
Because what are you doing? You are making an image of the creation,
not the creator,
and then connecting it to the creator. Now, there are a couple of discussions that we have to deal with, because there's a couple of times that God tells them to make something.
Like when he told them to make
the ark.
Yeah, the ark.
Okay.
He gave specific
instructions as to what, but the ark was not him. The ark was a place. It was a sign of the covenant. It was not a symbol of him. It was a symbol of the covenant with him. Okay. But you also have the serpent raised up in the wilderness, the bronze serpent.
Yeah.
Okay. They said, look at it and you'll be healed.
Yeah.
Okay. It is very clear that later the Jews began to worship it and they had to have it destroyed. Okay. There's another discussion, and Michelle and I were talking about it because it comes into the music discussion. There is a song within our Christian culture that has a line that says, here I raise my Ebenezer. Okay.
I don't know the name, but I've heard that song. Yeah.
Okay. An Ebenezer is a stone of help. That's what Ebenezer means. And
I totally thought it was an old crotchety dude.
Well, because they named him Ebenezer Scrooge.
Yes.
Okay. But an Ebenezer is a stone of help. In fact, Charles Dickens, when he named him Ebenezer, was being ironic because he's named him a stone of help when he helps no one.
Like he was super Scroogey.
Okay. But an Ebenezer is a stone of help. The story in the word comes from the book of Samuel. Okay. In 1 Samuel, Samuel leads them to victory. And he says, he brings a rock out and he says, here is the Ebenezer. This is the symbol that God has helped us.
Okay.
And so he sets this stone. Okay. In the same way, you have places where the children of Israel put up an altar. Okay. Now, God sets specific standards for the building of an altar.
Yeah, all in that other books.
But understand, we're not talking just about the one in the tabernacle. But if you went in and built an altar to the Lord, and you could put one anywhere, that is absolutely clear that you could build an altar. But what he said was, it has to be just natural rocks, no mortar.
Just piled.
So you took, and typically it was 12 because of the 12 tribes. You take 12 big rocks and you make a little pile. And that was an altar. Okay. Well, an altar at some level is a place to worship. But in the case of this discussion, the altar had a different purpose. It was a place of remembrance. And we find that because each time that comes up, and the one that probably is the most important is after they cross the Jordan River. Okay, remember that whenever Joshua gets ready to lead them across the Jordan is at full flood stage.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a specific time of year that the Jordan is over its banks. It's running harder than it ever runs. And God goes and he stops the water. And it says it piles up in a heap north of them. And the riverbed dries out completely. And they go across, the priests are blowing the trumpet. They go across, they get to the halfway point, and the 4 guys holding the ark stop. And all the children of Israel cross around
the
ark. Okay. And then there's a set of guys, one from each tribe, that go back out, and they grab a big rock, put it on the shoulder, and head back out. Then when the ark leaves the water, as soon as the priests who are holding the ark step out of the area where there's going to be water, then the water releases and flows. Okay. And then God tells them, now I want you to build an altar at the bank of the river.
With that rock from
with those rocks, one for each tribe. Well, what's the purpose of that? Well, it wasn't for them to provide sacrifices because they had the tabernacle. That altar was to be a signpost.
Like a marker.
Okay, so the idea was that 4 generations later, Grandpa Joe or Grandpa Benjamin, let's do it that way because it needs to be a Jewish name, is walking with his great-grandson. And his great-grandson, they're walking by the Jordan River, and his great-grandson goes, "What the big pile of rocks?" And he goes, well, that was the place where...
Are those rocks still there?
Still now? Probably not. When we talk about the biblical discussion and in the book of Joshua, whenever it's written, it goes, it's still there to that day.
Yeah.
I'm sure they have gone now. But think about a big pile of rocks would last for a few hundred years.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the idea was that was the place where God led us across the Jordan. It was an opportunity to tell of what God had done.
Like a giant signpost.
Same thing with the serpent. That was the idea. This is the serpent that God used to heal us from all the fiery snake bites and all of that. That's one thing. It is another thing entirely to make an image that is going to be a or the God to you.
Okay.
Okay. Picture of Jesus is not Jesus.
No.
Okay. And if you start getting that confused, then there's a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. But he goes on and he says, notice that he says, I'm a jealous God. I don't put up with infidelity. And I visit the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me. So this is something that we sometimes don't like to deal with. But there is such a thing as generational sin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if you really look at it, it is very interesting to see how that if you have a great granddad who had an issue with a certain thing, let's say it's alcohol, then what happens? It moves down the generations.
It does. Yeah.
Okay. But what is so interesting about it is that if you will break the cycle by turning to God and having him help you to break the cycle, you can break that generational curse. It can be broken.
And isn't there like the same goes to say for like blessings?
Well, if you're disobedient, yeah.
No, I mean blessings, generational blessings.
Yes.
Like, because I truly believe that's probably the only reason I even came to God. Because I spent my whole life hating God. But everybody, like my grandparents and their parents, they were all faithful Catholic.
There are some of those things where that can happen. But I want you to understand that God is making a point here. He goes, both sides are abundant.
Yeah.
If you're unfaithful to me, the punishment is abundant. If you're faithful to me, then the blessings are even more abundant. Okay.
And that makes sense. And I totally get the details. I don't want to piss him off.
So verse 11, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Now, remember, we often say treating it as a curse word, and that is part of it. But it's really treating it as common. Okay. I'll give you another example, not a great one, but let's deal with it this way. when we talk about the US flag, okay, there are two levels that we can get into. One is desecrating the US flag. Okay, burning it, you know, okay, mistreating it in protest.
Rubbing it on the ground.
Okay. And still to this day, very big issue under the discussion of, well, is it okay to burn it in protest? Is it okay to that kind of thing? But there's another level here, which is disrespect. Okay. So some of them don't sound like a big deal. Okay. So it is disrespectful for the US flag to leave it on the pole overnight if you don't have a light shining on it.
Really? I did not know that. Like, I see people leave their flags up all the time.
You're supposed to have a light on it, or you're supposed to take it down at sunset. That's why it's taken down at the school every day.
That makes sense.
Okay. It is quote unquote disrespectful, except in a time of mourning, to not have it completely all the way up the flagpole.
Yeah. And you have
Okay.
it, like during a death, it's like half mass.
Yeah.
That much I know.
Okay.
Like, I don't know a lot about.
So understand that what God says here is you will not disrespect the name of the Lord your God. So it's not just a curse word, it's treating it as common.
Okay, so then I got another question, because I've been watching these films or these reels, and I think the guy is super funny. But I'm starting to think now that maybe he's using the Lord's name wrong. Because like he's like watching these stupid people, and he's always like, Jesus Christ on a
Yep.
motorbike.
Uh-huh.
You know, and he's not like using it as a cuss word, but it's like
Everyday
So
language.
everyday. Like,
so it should be treated with reverence.
okay, see, I thought there was something hinky with that.
Okay.
Okay.
It should be treated with reverence.
Reverence.
That's what makes me
With
so
respect.
mad to listen to Biden when he's, my God, and I'm like, you stand there and say.
My
you're
God is a great
religious,
guy.
you say that?
Mhm.
It makes me so mad to listen to him.
Oh, yeah.
And so understand that that is part of this. Okay.
Okay.
Treat it,
Gotcha.
don't treat it as common.
Don't treat it as
Then
common.
verse 12 kind of goes the same way. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy as the Lord your God commanded you. Okay. So we've talked at length about the Sabbath. The Sabbath is Saturday. And the
Yes.
Sabbath is a day to rest and worship.
And worship.
Okay. Now it says, okay. I was curious to see if this doesn't, no. Okay. So here he doesn't use the same thing. It says 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you, your son, your daughter, or your male servant or your female servant, or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock. So even your livestock's to rest.
Which is just good maintenance.
Or the sojourner within your gate, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath. Understand, it is not just them. They are to provide rest for those that are not Jewish in their midst. Okay.
And the Jewish people, they totally like blow these way out of proportion.
Somewhat, yes.
Like the whole resting and like the whole using the Lord's name. Didn't they stop using his name at all?
Yes.
Like altogether?
Okay.
Okay.
So I want to show you a small difference here. Exodus 20, verse 8 says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall do. So notice all of this is to the same up to this point. In verse 11, after the male servant, female servant, livestock. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Okay, so the reason I bring this up, you will find in our culture today a big movement to denounce the creation story. Okay, to change the timetable to whatever. Even in seminary, I had a guy go, Genesis chapter 1 cannot be used as a proof of 6-day creation. I say it's a hymn. And so it's not meant to, it's not narrative. It's not meant to be a proof that the earth was created in 6 days. So here is what I'm going to tell you. I don't know that it is a matter of salvation, whether you believe that God created everything in 6 days. However, what I will tell you is my belief in the 6-day creation does not come from Genesis chapter 1. It comes from Exodus chapter 20. Because God told the entire children of Israel, all million plus that are standing around the mountain, I created the earth in 6 days and I rested on the 7th day.
And he made the days for us and the times for us. So you can't even really argue that his time's different.
So they will use this wonderful thing that says that there's a place in the New Testament where it says, to the Lord, 10,000 years is like a day and a day is like 10,000 years. Okay. He is apart from time.
Yes.
However, when he, speaking to mankind, uses a unit of time, as far as I can tell, there is no place. I have yet to, I could be wrong, but at this point, I have never seen a time where he has said, this is the time frame that something's going to happen. And it doesn't happen exactly according to the human time frame he says. Okay. In Genesis, he says, I'm going to come back in a year and Sarah's going to have a baby. She has a baby in a year. He tells Abraham, the children of Israel are going to spend 400 years in captivity. In Exodus, it says it's to the very day.
Which makes me want to believe that he's pretty right on about this.
Okay,
case.
so Exodus chapter 20 leads me to believe that God created the earth in 6 days and he rested on the 7th day. And so because of that, he has said, I want you to follow the same pattern I did in the creation. Now, one of the things they will try to say is, well, clearly it can't work that way because the 7th day is obviously not just a 24-hour period because he's still in that. No, it doesn't say that God rested from everything. It says that God rested from the work of creation. 6 days he created everything. He rested on the 7th day and then
The following day,
right.
he went back to
We're
work.
not still in God's Sabbath.
No, because that would assume that God's not still working.
Right. Okay.
My question is, why would anybody that is Christian really argue that point? Why would anybody even try to debunk that it was 6 days?
Because they are trying to pattern a system that melds the current scientific beliefs about the origin of the universe with Christianity. Okay,
Well, I think
so
that's stupid.
well, and I would agree with you. But if you can go in and say, so there is a major movement within the church now, which is called intelligent design. Okay.
That doesn't sound like Christianity to me.
So, but it is. So it means that we don't know how God did it. And we don't know the timetable that God did it. And we don't know exactly how it works. Although some of the scientific stuff probably did happen, the evolution stuff and all of that, but God designed it. So it's still God who did it, but he didn't do it. He might not have done it the way it says in Genesis.
Yeah, I don't think that's right. That just doesn't feel right to me.
So I give you my, okay.
Okay.
Now I will say, so let's dig into a couple things here. Okay.
I like it.
When you hear the word evolution,
I think malarkey.
okay. In most cases, it's not.
Well, no, the animals evolve. I get that.
Okay.
But I don't believe that we like I don't believe we evolved from apes and all that crap.
So,
but I do believe the animals are still currently evolving.
the original picture of what Charles Darwin saw, okay, is this. So use a couple of examples. In the Galapagos Islands, there is a type of finch. Okay. And the finch comes kind of in two varieties. Okay. One variety has a smaller beak and one variety has a larger beak. The same species of bird but they have two kind of different ways that they're designed. When there's a drought and the food source becomes mainly this particular type of seed that is very tough and hard to crack, then the bigger beaked version of this finch has an advantage.
Yeah.
Because the beak's bigger, it can crack those easier. Okay. And so the population of the smaller beaked finch goes down and the population of the bigger beaked finch goes up. When that reverses, then you will see the population shift between these two. And so what Darwin said was, well, obviously, eventually that species could completely change where only the bigger beaked version is there. And he's absolutely right. Here's the problem, still a finch. It's not an ostrich now.
Yeah, it's still a finch.
Okay. So when you look at those discussions, there's an element here that as long as they can still interbreed, they are the same species.
Yeah.
Okay. Take a horse and a donkey. Okay. It's a horse and a donkey that make a mule.
Yeah.
Okay. A horse and a donkey are two separate species. Okay.
But they could be bred to make mules.
But there's a reason why this works. In order to be considered the same species, how you breed then can breed. All mules are sterile.
Yeah, I know that. Mules can't have babies.
Okay, so all mules are sterile. So a horse and donkey can interbreed and make an animal that survives, but it will be sterile because they're not the same species.
So they can't reproduce on their own.
Right. So let's dig into a couple things here. In the book of Genesis, when we get to the flood, okay, it says two of each kind. It doesn't say two of each species, it says two of each kind. So let's look at some kinds here. A polar bear and a brown bear are incredibly similar, aren't they?
Yeah, in fact, they're even breeding now.
Okay. A horse, a donkey, a zebra, they're very similar.
But they're different.
But they may have, as we have often said within this discussion, of a common ancestor or something to that area. If you go in and you say, well, all the horse kind and all of the dog kind and all of the cat kind and all of the rodent kind and all of the whatever, human kind and ape kind and all of that, then you suddenly shrink down the population of animals that had to be on the ark. Okay, because you have understand that we get this idea, and I want to make sure I say it. It does not say that God created every single species of animal right at the beginning that we've ever seen.
No.
Okay. He created a horse or something like a horse that is now the ancestor of all the
other equestrian animals.
Okay. It doesn't, the reason that evolution falls on its head really fast is you take God out of it completely. In 6 days, God created everything. But natural processes have affected everything that God created.
Yeah.
Now, the fun part of that is who's in charge of the natural processes?
God.
Okay. This is another one of those interesting heresies that come in, and it's called deism, is what it's called. And it's the discussion of the great watchmaker. That's how I'm going to phrase it. Okay. You have a guy who makes a watch. Okay. Takes the watch, he makes the watch. He winds it up, and then he sets it down and never touches it again. What's the watch going to do? It's going to run.
Until it needs to be wound again.
Okay. So there are those even within that would call themselves Christians who believe that God is like a watchmaker, that he created the earth and then he goes, okay, wind. Okay, go. That's not what the Bible says. The Bible says that he is intimately involved in every moment. In fact, it says that if for even a moment he were to stop holding it all together, it would all go whoosh.
Yeah, and actually before I even got into the Bible and before I really became a Christian, I thought if there was a God, that must have been what he did.
Uh-huh.
He created everything and now he's on vacation.
Mhm.
Like, goodbye,
But-
have fun with
but
your
that is
fish,
not- yeah.
you know.
But that is not how it works.
No, now that I've gotten into the Bible, I just was like so amazed.
But understand that, and I know we've chased a rabbit here, but the idea here, it comes back to this. Each of these commandments, the first 4 all deal with our relationship with God. And all 4 of them deal with the idea that God is worthy of this response because of all that he has done for us. Okay. Why do we honor the 7th day? Well, because God created everything there is and he rested on the 7th day, so we should do likewise. Why do we make sure not to use his name in vain? Because it is at his name. His name is the name of the great creator. And in fact, when you go forward and moving it to Jesus, remember that at the end of all of this, it says that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue confess that he's Lord. So guess what? You don't treat his name lightly because his name's not light.
Yeah.
Okay. You don't make a graven image because you don't compare the God creator of all things with the things he's created. You don't have another God before him because he's the only true God and everything else is just a lie.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We're going to stop right there. We will pick up with honor your father and mother. Verse 16.
Honor your father and mother.
Yep.
Oh, and that'll be on Sunday. She'll be up there.
Oh,
Sorry, I get chasing around.
Nope,
Guys.
I do it too. The questions are important though.
Well, and it helps you understand some of it, and there's things that get brought up that, you know, you want to think about.
I have a whole question of mine.